Hello there, I'm Callum and welcome to the EU in Review, where I will review the Star Wars Expanded Universe as I experience it. And this time, as my return for 2020, so I'm going to have a spoiler-free section at the start for those that haven't read it. And for those that have read it, or don't care about spoilers, you can go into the section and you'll know when it happens. So, to start off with, I'm going to read the blurb, because blurbs don't really have spoilers. Maybe a spoiler for the previous book, but if you're reading this book, then you should be reading the series, theoretically. But there you go. And it's been out since 1996, so that's 23 years old. That's the same age I am. So you really shouldn't be worried about spoilers when it's that old too much. But, the blurb. It says at the top, and I'll go down. Sleek, swift, and deadly, they are the X-Wing fighters, and as the battle against the Empire rages across the vastness of space, the pilots risk both their lives and their machines for the cause of the Rebel Alliance. Now they must embark on a dangerous espionage mission, braving betrayal and death on the Imperial homeworld to smash the power of a ruthless foe. X-Wing, Wedge's gamble. It is the evil heart of a battered and reeling empire, Coruscant, the giant city world from whose massive towers the Imperial High Command directs the war. The rebels will invade this mighty citadel in a daring move to bring the empire to its knees. But first, Wedge Antilles and his X-Wing pilots must infiltrate Coruscant to gain vital intelligence information. Capture means death, or worse, enslavement by the vicious leader known as Iziz, now Emperor in all but name. And one of Rogue Squadron's own is already her slave, a traitor hidden behind a mask of innocence, working to betray both colleagues and the rebellion itself. Oh, pretty cool blurb, hey? And this does continue on in the series from X-Wing Rogue Squadron, which is the first book, and this is the second book in the X-Wing series. So first, it's also written by Michael A. Stackpole, who's done a brilliant job of the writing, I think. And I have a few things for this spoiler-free section I thought I would make sure I mention. So, I think the plot is quite well, like the overall plot on paper I think is really cool, especially when you read the blurb, is that, you know, it's something important. It's going into them going on a mission into Coruscant, so it's about the X-Wing squadron, but they also do ground missions, which is cool. And I'm just extrapolating that from the blurb, so it shouldn't be a spoiler. And the ideas in it, I think, are brilliant. The things that they use, go into detail later on, but the ideas and the way that it's written for the story, for the book, I think is really well done. And how they have pacing that has, you have a lot of quieter moments in the middle that really build up your connection to the characters, and then what happens to the characters you feel really invested in when they actually go on the missions. And as well as that, you get the whole tone of the thing being very suspenseful. For example, it takes a lot of the quieter moments, like on Coruscant, it's like, what's gonna happen? Don't know what's gonna happen. No. There you go. And yeah, pretty much I love the pacing. It's good. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but it's very much for this series, so it's like the first book. The pacing has shorter action, it feels like, and then longer moments in between where you really learn about the characters, which is really cool. And the overall plot on paper is solid, and learning how they get there is cool. The different perspectives you see from everyone really give a lot of depth to it, and you get a reader's perspective, which is really cool. And I'll probably repeat this later as well, in that you get perspectives from both sides, and you get to see a reader's perspective of what's going on and following along all the characters, and I love how that comes together. The dialogue, the style is really good. I think for Star Wars, because we know that George Lucas picked specific styles of dialogue for his movies, and so you can see that that sort of dialogue is kept up with. It's Star Warsy. You feel like it'd be part of the universe rather than taking you out of it. Like, for example, going back to Jedi Prince, which I've already reviewed, but without a spoiler-free section, some of the dialogue you get there just doesn't seem to quite fit with the feel of Star Wars, which I think Michael Stackpole does a really good job of doing that in this book. And also the suitability I've got as a note, and I pretty much covered that. The style keeps you engaged, it explains things well, and the suitability as well, in that they're not doing exposition as much just for the sake of exposition through dialogue. They're actually, well, some of the things are explained just in the start, because just in case you forgot some details from the previous novel, they do that. I think they do a really good job with the dialogue, and that goes into the writing style with the pacing already covered, but the amount of detail and everything, to me, it felt like the amount of detail was about right. Because I love hearing the little details about the ships and stuff and how things work, but it doesn't go into super detail so much that you just feel like you're reading a manual for the X-Wings or something when they explain a part of the X-Wings, which I think is really good. And the use of language, it's quite good. Like, it uses English, but then it also uses the colloquial terms that are set up in the first X-Wing novel for, like, the squints and the eyeballs and the other things they call the Imperial ships. I think that actually is integrated really well as the Star Wars substitutes for the swear words like criffing and cark and those sorts of things. You'll know if you've read a Star Wars EU book that swear words, you know that they're swear words in the context, but what I really love about Star Wars is that they substitute the language of it so that it actually feels like a galaxy far, far away rather than just copying English. So that's good. And as far as continuity, I think that this book's great for continuity. It has a bunch of connections to earlier works as well. So going back to, if you've read some of the other post-Return of the Jedi material that's come out before the X-Wing novels, you'll see the connections that actually happen there. And I think that's really good. I haven't found any continuity errors as such. And I think as far as the writing, I only noticed the small amount of typos, it seems like. I'll get to, because my spoiler section will have all of the notes as I read it. So overall, I really loved this book, really. It took me a while to read it, but that was more because I needed to sort out my routine properly, and then once I've read it, I really love this, and I'm loving the X-Wing series so far as well, in that the way that it's written gives you slower moments, and then the bigger action moments seem a lot more powerful and impactful. And especially when it gets through it to the ending of the story with the climax, it is brilliant, and I really love how it ended up being at the end where you're not sure if something's happened or not, and it leaves you on a cliffhanger ready for the next novel, which is a brilliant thing. So just leaves you in suspense, and because it's later on, I wouldn't have wanted to wait for the next book, but because it's later on, I'm reading these all in order. It's great. I really love it. For the spoiler-free section, I don't think I'm going to give a rating as such, because I don't view books that way. I think of it as very much, did I enjoy it or did I not, and is this worth reading? So, I really did enjoy this, obviously. and I think it's definitely worth reading because it covers some very important events to the timeline of the New Republic. Never mind that this is one of the first popular stories and the really well written stories without any of the big three, Luke, Han and Leia, and it does a brilliant job of it while bringing important events for the formation of the New Republic, which is great. So that is my spoiler free section. Now I'll get into the spoilers, and this will be, as in my previous reviews, the thoughts I have on the book as I go along, so I write notes as I read it. So I thought it was cool is to see Rogue Squadron and Defender Squadron working together, because in the first book they were at odds, and then they've actually come together to work together, which is cool. It's cool to imagine, at least to see, the Y-Wings and the X-Wings working together. And I like how it introduced different hacking methods. Like, it seems like Michael Stackpole really did a lot of research into the way that you can hack something, or like research into now hacking methods, but then creating new ones for the science fiction part of Star Wars, which is cool. Thought it was a cool little detail to have quadanium steel armored solar panels, so it's not like they're just solar panels, but they actually have some armor on them. It's one of the little details I liked on the TIE fighters. And I thought it was a cool idea for the ship to try and sneak the ties into Borlaeus. It was a good way of bringing in to be able to win the Battle of Borlaeus and all that stuff. And I thought it was actually cool how Michael added Al Nunn in, which is the relative of Nien Nunn from Return of the Jedi, and she's also in Rogue Squadron during this book, which is really cool. I like how there's connections to the original trilogy with having to use the same characters and creating new characters that are really good as well. I grew to like Arrow quite well, as with all the characters for Rogue Squadron, of course. I thought also it was interesting that Pash Kraken is the son of General Aaron Kraken, and I like later on in the novel as well how that creates some suspense and some conflicts between Wedge and Aaron Kraken, just not knowing who the spy in Rogue Squadron is that they hinted at in the first book. And what I also thought was interesting was that Arrel has her own room as a female in Rogue Squadron compared to the others that would bunk together and be together as, well, there was a couple, but mostly men in the Rogue Squadron, so there's that. And there's a mention of a Stockley spray stick, which is also in the Thrawn trilogy, which is cool, and the Cantina fleet, which of course connects to the Thrawn trilogy as well. So I really like the connections that Michael makes to the Thrawn trilogy throughout the whole series so far. And Tycho's story on the Lusankia is actually really cool, how they tell the story of Tycho tells his story of what happened in Lusankia and others sort of how it was told. I'm not that good with exact details, especially after reading the next book and then reading comics in between and everything, but I thought it was really cool. And something I really loved as well in these quieter moments is the political maneuvering inside of the rebellion leadership, because Admiral Akbar is a military man and he has trouble with a lot of political infighting, and really the more I read about Bor's failure, the less I like him and the more you hate him. Anyway, on page 32 is cool because it addresses the naming of Imperial Center versus Coruscant, and why the Empire calls it Imperial Center and why the Rebels call it Coruscant, pretty much. Akbar's briefing gives a history of Coruscant before Return of the Jedi, which I thought was pretty cool. And so you get to see a bit of an insight, and it builds the world more to understand more about what's going on. It also mentions Saint Passage, which connects to the prequels before the prequels ever came out. Now, I think Saint Passage was an advisor for Palpatine still later on, but we only really see Saint in the prequels, which is really cool to think about. Because George must have at least known, oh, there's a character called Saint Passage that I'll bring to the prequels to connect to the EU, which I love. I like the breakdown of the Coruscant defenses, and pretty much all of the explanation of how all that works is really cool. I love that. The shields line up with the Return... Why did I say Return? Revenge of the Sith novel. Because it has the shields in the Revenge of the Sith novelization as well, from memory. With the attack of Callum on Coruscant, of course, there. Now, it does bring in Leia. I like how Leia and Wedge talk. Just a little bit. She's not an important plot point, but because it follows Wedge and Rogue Squadron more. And how Boss failure just makes even more of a nuisance of himself. Every time you see Borsk, it's to make a nuisance of himself. Not a character you're supposed to like. And it mentions Luke is searching for Jedi artifacts and documents, which is actually cool because that's telling what Luke is doing while him not being there, and you know that he wants to rebuild the Jedi Order, so he's searching for the artifacts and documents like he should, which is cool. Leia says that she started her Jedi training from Luke's regiment when she can, because she's involved in a lot of the setting up of the New Republic. She's actually also learning how to become a Jedi, at least in part, which is really cool to see. So she's not shirking the responsibility of having the power of the Force and being able to use it. And it's also a thing they mentioned that it's a learning thing for Luke, that Luke needs to learn how to train Jedi, and so he starts with Leia, at least, I forget if it's mentioned in this book but in others, to be able to know how to teach people how to use the Force properly. Especially with the children coming up in it. Page 41 references Obi-Wan's quote in Heir to the Empire, which is cool because I think it's Leia that says, with the responsibility of being the last, or rather the first new Jedi Knight, weighs very heavily on him. And what I thought with that was the quote from Obi-Wan in Heir to the Empire where he says, "You're not the last of the old Jedi, Luke. You're the first of the new." Now, I'll paraphrase that. You know what I mean. And if you've read it, you'll know that quote. And I think this is the first time uglies are mentioned. And uglies are mongrel smart fighters, so they'll put TIE solar panels on an X-Wing body or that sort of thing. They just mix and match the parts. And as far as I remember, uglies haven't been mentioned in a novel yet, as far as the fighting forces against Rogue Squadron, which is really cool. And it's interesting as well that Iziz transfers Major Wharton to serve under Thrawn, which is a nice connection. And when I reread the Thrawn trilogy, I'll have to pay attention if Major Wharton ever turns up as a mention there, but it's a nice connection that she knows about Thrawn and that he's doing stuff. I thought it was interesting to hear about the work on the virus that's been doing, and I was interested to see what it actually ends up being in the end, because they say about this virus but they don't really explain about it a lot. And I really like the briefing, the explanation of the operation, how Michael Stackpole wrote it, the explanation of the operation to go to the ground on Coruscant, and that Wedge has great knowledge that he can actually use, which I thought was really cool. And what I thought was quite interesting was Borsk's failure wanting to revive Black Sun. And there's a connection as well, and a reference to Prince Shizor and Shadow of the Empire with Black Sun, as well as all the other times Black Sun appears in Star Wars EU, which is really cool. I really like that connection. And it's cool how Borsk ends up referencing the Happens, which is connection to courtship and Princess Leia, and also the Imperials at Bakura, which is a connection to Trisha Bakura. And I like how it carries on Lou Jane Forge's legacy with her family. It adds more meaning to her death as well, that the death from the previous novel still has an impact in the next novel and moving forwards. I think it's very interesting how we have Moff Florivaru and how he has a backstory with Corelli and how that works. And I like how it gives us an Imperial point of view with Curtin Law again. So in the first book it gave us a parallel timeline showing Curtin Law's point of view on the Imperial side in certain chapters and Rogue Squadron in the others, and so on and so forth, which I thought was really cool because you get a reader's perspective on what's happening and you get a real good insight into what's going on. And Law's assessment of Corran is quite interesting on pages 91 to 92. Unfortunately, the book's not with me, so I won't read it out at the moment because I didn't write it down. It's interesting that Bacta can also cure diseases, I thought, and not just flesh wounds. And they play on that with this specific super virus, which of course is later called the Kratos virus. The more diseased a person is, the more Bacta is needed, and they made it so that it requires a lot of Bacta, and that becomes a really political issue as well. And yeah, it's named the Kratos virus. Apparently from the world names for the viruses combined to create the virus, which is really cool. I like how there's reasoning behind the naming rather than just going, yeah, it's the Kratos virus. But no, it's given more meaning, which is really cool. And it's really cool how Uru, the Gand, can regrow his arm. I thought it was really cool, and Gand ended up being very useful as an alien in Rogue Squadron for some of the important points in the plot, which is really cool. And there's a whole lot of disguises when they go to Coruscant. And what I really loved about the disguises was imagining them and all that, of course, but what I thought would be great is if there was actually ever illustrations of the characters in their disguises, which I think would be really cool to see, but I don't think there are any at the moment that exist, that I've seen anyway. And I really like the little detail of the Imperial pronouncing the name Rowett wrong for the first time. And I could pronounce it wrong as well, but I thought it was quite interesting how there seems to be a lot of care and attention put into the writing to just give a little something like an Imperial mispronouncing a name first, which I really like. And page 110 it says about Wedge's disguise being a forbidden attraction, which is really cool because of how it sort of sticks out, but then people wouldn't want to get in his way and wouldn't want to really interact with him as much and pay attention because he has something so glaringly looking wrong with him, which is really cool. I'm pretty sure that this would have been a typo on page 113, that it either says it's Rohare or Rohari Biomedical Clinic, and it does this a couple of times where it misspells something twice on the same page or something, and you're not sure which it is. I also thought it was really interesting that Ayala Wasiri, which is mentioned in the first Rogue Squadron novel in connection to Corran, appears as Kraken's agent, and I think it's a cool way of introducing her. And I thought that Erisi Dlara is so sexualized. I was like, Michael went, okay, I just want to write a really sexualized character, so I'm making it like that. But it does make sense when it seems to be the purpose of her character and the disguise that she's wearing. And it's also very interesting about the Kuwati Telbans. And thinking about the Kuwati Telbans and the Kuwait itself, it connects to the Bounty Hunter Wars books with how it expands on a different part of the Kuwati nobleman things. And I like how that builds the world. And it's really interesting how it goes into Corrin thinking about Corrin and Iziz being in separate social classes just in the way that they act when they're in disguises. Like, Iziz seems really in her element when she's acting like this haughty person that's got everything. And the way that they act is very interesting to read because it goes into how Corrin's like, yes, she's attractive and everything, but I can't get along with her because of deeper reasons. It's like the personalities don't really match up, which I really like Corrin for how he thinks about those things. I also thought it was interesting how the solar reflectors keep Coruscant temperate all year round. And it's an interesting connection to later on and what happens with the solar reflectors in the Battle of Coruscant to take over Coruscant, which is in this novel, so I'll keep going. And it mentions the Mannerheim Mountains, which first appeared in Heir to the Empire, which is another connection, which is cool. And Corrin thinks the Imperial Palace is a hive of evil. And what I thought of was a reference back to the quote in A New Hope in the original Star Wars going, "You'll never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy." It's a nice play on the familiar phrases that we all know from the movies, which is cool. The agent code name is Targeter, but they don't name her to start with, but from the description and reading the Thrawn trilogy, we know it's Winter, which is really cool. And Winter is a childhood friend of Leia's, which I like how that builds the backstory for her as it goes along and everything. It's cool. And I love how it's explaining the Invisec section of Coruscant, which is a slums basically for virtual slaves of the Empire and people that are just downtrodden and they don't care about. So it's interesting that they take advantage of the Invisec section of Coruscant as well. And it's interesting, Big Starklighter died in A New Hope, but more about his life is actually revealed through Gavin's backstory, because Gavin Darklighter is, of course, his relative. I think it's his brother, but I can't remember exactly without looking it up. And I think that's a good way to do it. And then when you rewatch Star Wars, it adds more meaning to who Biggs is, which is really cool. I love how Wedge is the one going into assessing how loyal the populace of Coruscant is. I love each aspect that they have to do, but I especially love this aspect because they have to go in and they have to find out, okay, if we take over, will we actually be able to hold the planet, or are they so brainwashed and are they so they're so loyal to the Empire that they'll just chuck us out? If we try and take over, which is quite interesting. I also found the Imperial propaganda really fascinating to read, and I love how it reflects what we know of the Emperor said to people in the prequels. How the Emperor said that the Jedi were traitors and everything, and how he twists history to be able to brainwash the people, basically. And everyone eats it up because that's the only thing they have. They're stuck on Coruscant, they don't live anywhere else, and if they do go elsewhere, it's an Imperial world, or they're told that they're in the main populace, at least the public, are put in the little Imperial areas and aren't allowed to get information, or are told that these guys are just rebels that want to try and believe their propaganda, which the Empire says isn't true. Which is really cool, and I love the whole propaganda part they put into it, especially with Emperor's Museum, and how that could actually be used to explain some parts of some stories that may have some continuity errors between the canon tiers inside the EU, which I thought was cool because it's all one continuity, and you can look at it as going, here's the Imperial propaganda that can apply to, say, a story from the Clone Wars era, and be able to say, okay, so that was propaganda they wanted people to believe for people at the time. And page 138 says that, it does appear in this one. I forgot the Emperor's Museum does come up because this is on Coruscant. I was thinking a book ahead. Emperor's Museum comes up in this one, and it's the Imperial propaganda. And on page 138 it says how the old parts of the exhibit have been sealed up for over 30 standard years, which is another testament to how they're controlling the people, but it also wouldn't be accurate given what we know of when the prequels came out with the Clone Wars later on. But it is consistent with the timing Zahn gave in the Thrawn trilogy, which is cool, because you know this book was published in 1996, so it's gonna be before the prequel timing came out for how long it was between the Clone Wars and the original trilogy and all that. I'm thinking about it, for 30 years, it's 19 years until A New Hope. It's been a few years between A New Hope and Return of the Jedi, and then this is a few years later. That will be close to 30 years. Because this is about 4 years after Return of the Jedi. So it's close to 30 years, and you could even just go, they're going by a different calendar that they're using at the time. Which is interesting. And that's how I think of the Thrawn trilogy as well. As like, yeah. The timing does work out when you think about it in retrospect. Huh. That's cool. It mentions the guards with more stylized and aesthetically pleasing stormtrooper armor on Coruscant. I really like how... I'd really like to see how someone would illustrate that. To see how the people interpret more aesthetically pleasing and stylized stormtrooper armor. Because I don't think I've seen any art of that I know of. And it'd be really cool to see a lot of that. I think on page 160 is a cool quote saying, "She does not live, she lares." And hearing Izan's plans for the rebellion is really cool. And yeah, I love how it goes into thought process as well, thinking of the Imperial propaganda side of it, of what's normal. It's like, normal for the Coruscanti people is the Empire and controlled. The Emperor's Museum, what they're taught in the schools, and being brainwashed by the Empire to believe a different history than what actually happened. It's really cool. And I'm loving Connor's interactions with Iziz and how it's progressing, because Iziz is trying to seduce him. But he's being held back because of the logic in his previous experiences. And it's a really good foreshadowing to what comes later, which I'm not going to spoil because that's in the next book it's revealed. But yeah, it's really interesting how what Iziz says on page 179 encapsulates that. And again, I don't have the book with me, otherwise I would read the quote. Page 180 says about a Haven Princeling, which you think of Princess older, and that'll be in reference to courtship of Princess Leia, which is cool. Corran in a brown jacket reminds me of Blade Runner, and more recently as well, thinking about, because I watched Firefly recently a bit more, it reminds me of the brown coats in Firefly, even though Firefly came out a bit later. Similar ideas, that's how I imagined it. What's interesting to note is that it says Corsac was dissolved by the Imperial Diktat, which is really cool because then that's a personal connection for Corran, as well as that's the sign of the Emperor taking over even more, getting rid of the planet's independent security force to just be taken over by the Empire. Now I love the dark and gritty feel of the Coruscant lower levels, and what came into that was really cool. Yeah, I think I will probably butcher the pronunciation of this name, but that's okay. Domaina, I thought, is it interesting character. He's a Deveronian in a black coat, which imagining it would look really cool. And it's funny because it has a problem that arises just from Gavin refusing to dance with Bothan, which is funny because there's this whole thing of the Bothan saying, "Oh, you don't love me, he's causing problems, attack him," and it's hilarious. And you can really see that it reflects human nature in some parts as well, which makes it even funny because there is truth to how they act, because it's how some humans act in certain situations. And the Battle of Dara 4, as mentioned, which first appeared in the Empire Strikes Back radio drama, which I thought was really cool. Even more connections. Nawara, then, is a great character to argue with the logic. And of course he was a lawyer, so that makes sense, and I really like how he just goes in for all of his friends and helps them. So Ubrikian HAVR-A9 floating fortress, which appears. And it's really interesting because that first appeared in When the Desert Wind Turns, the Stormtrooper's Tale, which is in Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina. I think that's the comic, not the novel, which is cool. And it's revealed that it is winter, which is I thought of earlier because I'd read Heir to the Empire, the Thrawn trilogy, and she appears, and she did first appear in Heir to the Empire, which is cool. I love how Michael Stackpole puts in a lot of the time and effort to connect a lot of things to the previous material that's released while introducing all of the new stuff that he does. Because it's really cool as well how they slice into the auxiliary computer centers just to send messages to each other. Now on page 196, there's a random quotation mark at the end of a sentence there, which is probably a typo. And I've typoed on some of my notes, so think for half a moment. Winter's analysis is great to read, knowing that Whistler was a droid, so Winter has perfect recall, and she knows Corrin from the files and everything. It's really cool. I thought the little details of snap clips to hold a blaster, I don't remember appearing elsewhere now, so little detail, it's quite possible that it was missed. I don't remember, so that's basically, it's got a clip, and then you put the blaster to it, and it'll clip to the holster, and it'll be on your hip things. I don't remember that appearing elsewhere, so that's a really cool little detail that was added in. I love how the end of chapter 24 leads directly into the speeder chase in chapter 25, and then in chapter 26 it switches perspectives, but makes that the connecting event so that everything sort of goes on at the same time, but it's all connected, and I really like how it does that. Corrin dual wielding blasters is cool, and I think that could have influenced some characters like Nico Okar using dual blasters. Looks cool. That's how I imagine that sort of thing in the SWTOR trailer. Looks cool. It's also interesting how they made failure more prominent, especially from the first book into this one, because he's more important to the story later on in Heir to the Empire and the whole governing of the New Republic. On page 217 it says, as elusive as the Katana Fleet, which is another Katana Fleet reference. It's interesting how, though, these little connections appear in the X-Wing series more, whereas they're not mentioned really at all in the previous material. You might have one or two little mentions that I forgot, but when reading it I was going, this mentions the Katana Fleet a fair bit, and previous books haven't done that as much. Also pretty cool how it's the Rebellion of the New Republic that has an interdictor cruiser, and it's the first time that they've had one, which is really cool, and Akbar has a plan with it because he's a military guy. It's cool. Who's more foolish quote on page 240 is a nice twist of the normal phrase, I thought. And I love the detail in building up the realism of the New Republic. It's not a united front, it's not perfect, because we've got the Bothans doing their thing, which is separate, which follows later material and what they cause problems. And it's quite prominent in these books, in at least the political side and what they're all doing, because eventually the fights become more influenced by politics than actual military strategy. And the Bothans doing their thing is just causing more problems than them being unified and going together as a whole. And it's interesting, because this book addresses interspecies couples. And there's a awkward naivety of Gavin, which is really cool. And you see Gavin grow as a character throughout, at least until the end of the next novel, which I've read at the moment. The kind of advice Corrin gives him is interesting, because it's like Corrin has some experience with that in the past that it alludes to. Quite cool little details. And going through some of Corrin's past experiences told by Ayala is entertaining and fun. And it's really cool how the detail is added that the biochemistry between species doesn't always match up. I think the example was that if you have a human and another species or something like that, then that species could cause a human to get a rash from certain things in their skin and all that. I love those little details. I love how clever Wedge is with the memory cores as well. It's really cool. I think this is the first time as well that Trandoshan has worked with the good guys after Empire Strikes Back, because I thought of Star Wars: The Old Republic and the Jedi Consul storyline and how you have a Trandoshan companion, of course. But yeah, I haven't read a Trandoshan working with the Rebellion and the New Republic. And since after Empire Strikes Back, of course, you see Bosk in that, so they thought Trandoshans should be bad guys, probably. But this is interesting how it goes into the species isn't inherently bad, it's just different people. There's aluminium studs in the construction of buildings, which is interesting, because it's a common element with the real world, I thought. And so we've still got common elements, as well as Star Wars having some different elements in it. And the combat's really cool. Page 269, I love the use of a stormtrooper's helmet flying off to hit another trooper. It's really cool. On page 273, there's a really cool quote. It says, "Intentions don't count, what you do does." And that's what a lot of the society thinks as well. It's like, yeah, you had good intentions, but it didn't turn out well. And I think especially in regards to serious outcomes, like someone's death, if you had good intentions with trying to stop someone and accidentally kill them, hypothetically, it doesn't matter what your intentions were, it's that he died by your hand, and that will never go away, and you will regret that for the rest of your life, sort of thing. And it's funny how on page 279 it says, "If the Force is with us, it's definitely the dark side." They have little darker humour like that, which is cool in the novel. I love the combat on Coruscant and how the grav truck was destroyed by the Z95 headhunter, and that Tycho appears is an added bonus, because you got no idea what Tycho's doing. He appears, I like how it weaves everything together, because they thought he died, but I knew he turned up later because of timeline. So it's really cool how his arrival brings in a tighter time constraint as well, to moving the plot forwards at a bit faster pace. And what I like that, because I was at a point where I was going, are you gonna do something, you're gonna take ages to formulate a new plan? But no, it's really cool how Tycho appears and it moves the plot at a faster pace, and it was just the right timing for that. And it's a cool play on Iceheart's nickname. On page 283, Iziz says, "I am Iceheart, I do not burn." It's actually really cool. I love little dialogue bits like that. Izard's plan is quite interesting, especially how she's getting curtain law in place to have the Empire using guerrilla warfare against the New Republic when they take the planet in a sort of role reversal, because the Rebellion will be using guerrilla tactics against the Empire for a long time. But now it's the Empire and Curtain Law that will be using guerrilla tactics against the New Republic. And I love the feeling of everything coming together with the final plan by Wedge and the rest of Rogue Squadron, and who joins them. Yeah, that's what I was thinking at the time. It's like, go get Mirax, Corrin. I love how they're coming together as a higher stake for surviving this mission, because it goes, Corrin finally asks Mirax to go on a date once they return to take Coruscant, which because of foreknowledge, I know that they end up together. This is a spoiler section. And so I was going, just go get her, go get her. It's really cool. Page 103 is not 103, page 301. Quite interesting, because Corrin uses the quote, shoot straight and fly fast. And I remember Murtajev saying as a Mando, shoot straight and run fast, as a well-wishing for a mission too. So I think there's a little connection to those quotes there. I'm also really liking Curtain Law's character development, him being more independent, and growing a bit of a spine to do more of his own thing, rather than just being a lackey to his own Izard. Even though that causes problems for him later. But that's the next book as well, it causes more problems. I really like how Captain Eeyore, it's Iillor, Illor, something like that, is ready with the Interdictor cruiser to pull the New Republic fleet early out if the shields aren't taken down by Rogue Squadron. And by having the 18-minute time limit from that chapter, it adds to the drama and suspense. But also what's interesting is Captain Eeyore is Imperial that defected, so there's an interesting aspect there. And it's also interesting, another feature of Uru and Lagan is that they don't have to breathe. There you go. And page 130, why am I braining on the page numbers? Page 317, he explains it, and I love how it comes up at just a major moment. It's almost like, oh, couldn't you have explained this sooner? But of course the need didn't come up for knowing that Gan don't respire, and so that's cool. Get more information on what happened to the Nida family, which is interesting because Vyra Nida is Captain Lorth Nida's cousin, and Lorth Nida was the Captain Nida that Vader force choked in Empire Strikes Back, which is really cool how they connect it together. But of course, the rest of the Nida side of the family has vanished, which is interesting, and Vyra Nida is on an orbital solar energy transfer satellite, which is one of the solar reflectors to keep Coruscant warm, basically, so you can live on it. The interesting part with that is that he was punished for Captain Nida's incompetency, basically, because Vader didn't like him and force choked him. The rest of the family was affected, which shows what the Empire's like, as well as adding an interesting extra aftermath of that. I think it's ironic that Vyra thinks the mirror is being repositioned for a top secret Imperial project, because Rogue Squadron hacks the satellite and repositions it. And it's just funny how he thinks, oh yes, I'm finally getting recognised. I'm going to have this important part in a top secret Imperial project, when it's more that it lets the New Republic take over. That's funny. And it's really cool how they give his perspective when it starts coming into importance. I think it's a cool twist how the storm to knock out the power station doesn't work immediately, but the computer rediverts to a grid that they didn't know about. So of course the plan didn't work perfectly, which is like real life, and the Empire would have looked at what happens if we get attacked, and so they have contingency plans in place. That's cool. And I love how it adds extra details to Corrin's path rather than just he got there. It describes how he got there, how he had to fly through the storm and dodge all the bits and pieces and all that. It's really cool. I love how the data is fed into the TIE to crash it into the target in the storm as the final blow to get the shields down. That was really what I thought was a touch of genius. Well, Michael Stackpole would have written it, but from the characters to think of that, because the fighters were going by target data to fly through the storm rather than their actual skill. So it was really cool. And I love the use of the mirror to destroy the Golden Defense platform, because the Golden Defense platform was killing a bunch of the rebels, New Republic, and he managed to destroy it with the mirror that was being rediverted, which is cool. It's really cool to see Akbar in action more, because for the Battle of Coruscant, it's also quite well detailed and thought out in the planning stage, and I thought it was really cool to have Akbar at the head of the fleet, taking charge and seeing him actually in action rather than just grumbling about going, I don't like these politics, I'm a military guy, which makes sense for his character, but he does his best of course with all of that too. Seeing Wedge devastated, thinking Corran died is a great moment for his character and really shows the effects of war, as Wedge is really hit hard by the death of his friends and it's not good. I'm saying thinking Corran died because I knew that Corran appeared again in Jedi Academy and in I, Jedi and later works. And Merrick's and Ayala's reactions during the celebrations along with Wedge's really hit home how much of the aftermath of Corran's supposed death has on Rogue Squadron. They build up the characters and they're basically, you become so attached to them that you're like, oh no, don't be sad, he's okay. But of course, you gotta find that out later, don't you? The twist with Tycho Celchu's arrest at the end leaves with a cool cliffhanger for the next book, which I think is cool and it's really good. And the epilogue with Corran Horn on the Lusankya is epic, because they build up the myth of Lusankya through the first and the second book, and then Corran Horn's like, you're there, wow, you're there, the place where everything goes down, and I got really excited for the next book. And I think the pace picks up a lot better, like quite well near the end of the book when they had the climax. It just kept coming up with things to add to the pace as an overall thought. I love the detail in the combat and ideas used to give the combat a detailed, gritty, real feel. Like they're using everything that they can to fight and not just blasters. I notice how Failure and the Bothans are really moving in the positions ready for Heir of the Empire and the later parts of the EU continuity. And it picks up each point of view that it starts earlier for the final battle and brings everything together, which is really cool. So, that's pretty much my thoughts on X-Wing, Wedge's Gamble. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. And you can hang out for my next review, which will be coming out, which will probably be part of the classic Marvel run. And then I'll be on to the Kratos trap. So, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. Uru!